Hello, my name is Andy Tattersall. I'm an information specialist here at the School of Health and Related Research. This is week 4 of HAR658, the social web and e-health. My contact details are on this slide here, and you can contact me via Twitter or via email if you have any pending questions, any kind of things that you want to talk about. So I'm going to start the presentation. The lecture will be probably just over an hour. We've got a lot of content to get through. So the session objectives of this is that we're going to firstly look at the evolution of the web. I'm going to have a look at how social media can be applied in a healthcare setting, how it's being applied in a healthcare setting. In addition, looking at the various social and web-based tools and resources that can be applied and the implications for using them, and also have a look at the boundaries around the NHS and the web, as obviously a lot of this that we're going to be looking at is web-based. So in terms of the evolution of the web and how the web has changed, I don't know the age of some of you, but if you're my age, you'll live at a time that there was a web before there was a web. I first came across the web around 1994. I was in London, I think. I was at a friend's workplace, and they were connected to the internet and were using the web at the time, a very kind of crude form. It had only been around for around 5 years at that time, if not less. So what we know about the web is that the web is a constantly evolving organic system of change. And it is an irresistible force. The web is continually eking into every aspect of our life. It's increasingly becoming hard to function and live. Certainly, if you work or study without the web, you couldn't go to university without using email and using a website. You just wouldn't get a degree these days. So the web is incredibly encroaching into every aspect of our life, from getting jobs to forming relationships to buying and selling things. The web moves in one direction. We don't get to a point where the web suddenly decides it wants to go back to a previous iteration, to a previous version, and it will continue to kind of evolve and change. And the way what we've seen over the last 25 years is it pretty much moves in one direction. It's very, very hard to predict what the web will look like. Nobody really knows what the web will look like in 5 years' time. Nobody would have predicted 10 years ago that Facebook would be as powerful as it is now, and nobody would have predicted 5 years ago that it would continue to grow and become incredibly powerful in terms of revenue and reach. And the same can be applied to lots of other technologies and platforms that have been in using the web over the past 25 years. This is Sir Tim Berners-Lee. Sir Tim Berners-Lee is the gentleman who, in effect, came up with the idea of the web. He didn't come up with the internet. The internet predates the web by several years. But the web is a platform which sits on to the internet, and it was Tim who was working in his CERN laboratory in Switzerland when he was working on various ideas, and one of them being the web, and he was allowed to work on that and create this kind of front-end platform for computers and people to talk to each other. The web has had various kind of iterations, so to speak, very loosely. The web, when it began in the late 80s and when it appeared in sort of like 1991 more publicly, until 2004, 2005, it was referred to as the web. But around 2004, 2005, it became Web 2.0, and it was very much a kind of a common theme for people to talk about Web 2.0 and how that would change. And the way that this changed with Web 2.0 was that the web became more social. It became more communicative, it became more democratic, and it became more multi-contextual. It wasn't static web pages of textual information with a few images. It became things like videos, it became YouTube, it became Facebook, it became Twitter. And we're now in the stage where we think about the web as perhaps Web 3.0, maybe even Web 4.0, and Web 3.0 being a web that is a semantic web, a web that makes more sense. So when we search for terms like cold, it has some idea that we are perhaps, based on what we're searching for and the language you use, we are looking for actually the common cold as opposed to being cold. This is Tim this is Tim O'Reilly from O'Reilly Media, and Tim O'Reilly was the guy who and his organisation who popularised the term Web 2.0. The actual term Web 2.0 goes back to 1999, and someone called Darcy Dianucci, who wrote a piece called Fragmented Futures, where they talked about this idea of a Web 2.0, an internet that was adaptable, that was communicatable, that people could use it and manipulate it without knowing HTML, which until that point you needed specific web skills to be able to manipulate the web. So Web 2.0 is, and we don't particularly talk about Web 2.0 anymore, but in effect it's the read-write web, it's the social web, it's the web today. If you had a CD, you could play a CD 20 years ago, and then they invented that you could then record onto a CD, and then they made it that you could re-record onto a CD. And this is very much along the lines of the web. It was very much a static thing, and then it became a thing that people could write onto. This is the Gartner Hype Cycle. This is the Gartner Hype Cycle for 2016. And Gartner are a large company who try and predict what technologies are going to kind of emerge in the next 10 years, 5 to 10 years, and they kind of predict, and you can see on this particular hype cycle, most of the technologies there on that kind of curve that's coming up will be, they predict between 5 to 10 years, possibly more than 10 years. A lot of these things will mean very, very little to most of us. We can kind of see things like virtual personal assistants. We can think about that possibly in terms of in our healthcare and things like that. Smart robots again in healthcare. So we know that these things perhaps are going to appear in the next 5 to 10 years in their very early form. But there's things out there, smart dust. You know, you may have heard of smart dust, but it's certainly still relatively kind of science fiction and still at least 10 years away according to Gartner. The way the Gartner Hype Cycle works, we apply this to any kind of technology. So on that hype cycle, that could be a smartphone, it could be an internet-enabled bed for a patient, it could be a toaster, it could be a microwave. And how these things work is that we have a technology trigger. It starts with the R&D, the research development, and then the startup companies kind of start to get their kind of venture capital funding. And then we get the early adopters that start to investigate. And we eventually have a product that is out there for the first innovators to use. And what we get is this kind of peak of inflated expectation. This can be anything. This can be social media. It can be YouTube. It can be anything. We get these things and then we start to kind of expect great things of them. And sometimes they don't come to fruition. So we have this peak of inflated expectations. And then we dip into a trough of disillusionment. We start to feel like, actually, our smartphone isn't that great. I bought a smartphone to improve my healthcare. It's not really doing much for me. I'm not losing weight. I'm not getting fitter. I'm not doing various other things that I could be using it for. And it doesn't work as well as I thought. But as these things kind of get ironed out, and as these technologies get developed and get better and better and better, we start to go into a slope of enlightenment where people start to get a bit more out of using them. And then we go into this plateau of productivity. So now we have things like smartphones, and a lot of us now get a lot more use out of it. We use it to activity track, we use it to track our sleep, we use it to communicate to each other, we use it to use social media, we use it to find information online while we travel around. And that's taken probably 5-10 years for us to kind of come out into this kind of plateau of where these technologies start to become useful. So benefits for patients using social media and Web 2.0 tools for healthcare. The ways that these kind of tools can be used for patients is that it gives them the option now, as opposed to a Web 1.0 world, where they can communicate with fellow patients. They can form self-help groups, so they can access other patients that have got similar conditions to them, and they can have this conversation as to their kind of treatment and their perspective of their conditions. It allows people now to access and discuss treatments at home, and it also allows patients now to add to the knowledge base. In a Web 1.0 world, it was very much authority at the top. A small group of people were allowed to kind of put their knowledge out into the world. And to some extent, that's quite a useful way to kind of filter out a lot of the rubbish. But it restricted people out there that did actually have interesting input to add to the knowledge base. And these can be patients, these can be charities, these can be various kind of individual kind of citizen groups that can then start to add their input to the knowledge base. It allows people to take a more active participation in their healthcare by being able to communicate over the web. In a world where we become increasingly concerned that people don't do enough to look after their own healthcare and are becoming increasingly reliant on healthcare provision by such as the NHS in the UK, then things like this can help patients be at home, do a bit more to kind of look around for their own health. It also is a feedback loop to practitioners about the provision that they get now. We can use a website that I'll show you later on, which you may have come across, that allows patients to feedback about their particular provision they've received. And it allows, such as mobile and smart devices, for patients to track and share their own health statuses. And there are tools out there to help people find funding for their own healthcare. There are barriers to this, of course. Not everything kind of comes and works for everyone. Not everyone has access to the internet. There are charities in the UK. There's one in Sheffield called the Tinder Foundation, which tries to enable people to become digital citizens. We know that there are certain demographics based on socio-economic groups that may not be able to afford to be connected to the internet, and also the kind of the silver surfers, the people over the age of 70 who may not be connected to the internet, but the internet actually provides them a great deal of benefits. It may solve problems like loneliness and also allow them to kind of research and support their own conditions. Then there's social media. Not everyone uses social media. A lot of people use the internet and the web, but they don't use social media. Not everybody knows how to evaluate and critique information, especially on the social web. In fact, the majority of people do struggle to evaluate and critique information properly. Going to university gives you this kind of the ability to do that, and it's an exceptionally wonderful life skill to gain, so that you can go and look at information and kind of evaluate it on a set of criteria to decide whether it is of good quality. Not everybody knows to do that, and particularly when we talk about health information, there's a tremendous amount of anecdotal and incorrect, biased health information out there. There's the issue of trolling, where patients may kind of be particularly not nice or kind of abusive to other patients on the web. We also know that people will post knowingly false information. That may be some pharmaceutical business. It may be some mischievous health care provider. It may be a patient who again wants to just put out some kind of bad information. Personal information can be shared accidentally. Again, issues over privacy. There's lots of problems with privacy, and this is very much stretches into things like social media. People not knowing about their privacy settings, not knowing what they're sharing, what they're talking about, and this can stretch as far as NHS and healthcare professionals if they don't know proper information governance. And then content is sometimes hosted on third-party sites. We don't know who the site is. We can't always say whether a site is of good quality. And a good example is there was a website which was based on information. It was an information site about Martin Luther King. And this website had loads of information about him. It was fairly kind of comprehensive, a lot of information going on there. And it was actually run and hosted by a white supremacist group. And it was ranked around number 3, number 4 in Google search results. And it was one of these that it wasn't overly explicit in that it was hosted by this white supremacy group. What it did is it kind of gave out a lot of information, but there was things in there which undermined the person that the website was based about. Social media changes very quickly, and again, some tools might decline in use and relevance. So it's very hard for people to stay up to date with the latest kind of tools and technologies out there. This was an update from 2 years ago from the Internet Access Quarterly Update from the ONS, which said that almost 9 out of 10 adults in the UK have used the internet. 87%. It's probably tipping around 90% now. You can see there the demographic being the over 75s that are using it the least, but then you can imagine that, and as the demographic gets older, that number will get greater, because there's a lot of people now in their 50s and 60s who've been using the internet for 20-30 years and will continue to use it into their 70s. So the benefits for healthcare providers using social media and Web 2.2 tools for healthcare. Well, it's kind of become commonplace now. Cloud computing is very common now. We access data off the cloud. Our emails are in the cloud. Lots of our communication and lots of our content is put into the cloud. Using these kind of tools can improve professional opportunities of professional development for staff. Makes them more employable. It makes them more adaptable. It's also very cost effective with many of these tools. A lot of these tools that have come around, as opposed to the traditional technologies that were around before, Microsoft Office, etc., is that a lot of these tools are free. They are very cheap alternatives. So in a business kind of sense, in a business case, a lot of these tools do offer cheaper, freer alternatives. The web and Web 2.0 and the social web has a flexibility about it. It allows people to work where they want. It allows people to be flexible. Now doctors can walk around with a tablet device. They can access such as the British National Formulary, NICE evidence. They can go in and look at things, patient data and things like that, excuse me, on their tablet device, because now data is being hosted in the cloud. And it also allows collaboration. It allows people to work anywhere, with anyone from anywhere. And it also allows people to share knowledge and resources. It allows people to kind of create research data opportunities such as big data, use this data in a healthcare setting, and access it. And a lot of this big data is generated from the social web. Lots of these companies, Google, Facebook particularly, are renowned for obviously trolling your data, because they know that the data is worth a lot, and they give you free services in exchange for that. And again, it's more personal. It's a more informal way to stay in touch with patients. And it can lead to things like reflective practice, such as blogging, etc., and tools like that. So, I mean, there are barriers to social web tools in healthcare. And you might think of some that aren't on this list, but there are ones I've obviously previously touched on to. Issues around data security. Patient data, your healthcare data, is the most sensitive data we probably can have, along with financial data. So keeping that kind of data secure and private, especially for vulnerable people, is quite important. Using the web more and the social web could be potentially seen as a time sink. If you give access to more websites and remove the firewalls within kind of healthcare settings, then staff might spend more time looking at personal social media sites. All this requires investment in time and money in terms of skill training. So this has a knock-on cost. And then there's the choice. If we go back 10 years ago, we had a certain amount of websites that could be applied within healthcare, that could be used by practitioners and patients. If we look at it now, that choice has grown incredibly. If you think about the number of social network sites out there, they number within dozens, if not hundreds. There are dozens of academic social network sites alone. And then there's the organisational resistance, resistance from management, IT support, and staff who may not want to kind of change how they work and may be worried about kind of particular issues that come up by using the new technology. And then there's the inappropriate use, the kind of the bad etiquette, online, and which can cause various problems. And again, we'll touch on to these things. With any kind of technology, there is this diffusion of innovation. Any idea has a diffusion of innovation. This is Dunbar's diffusion of innovation. And we always start with the innovators, the people like the Steve Jobs for Apple, the Bill Gates for Microsoft, and the people that kind of use the technologies very early. And then we have the early adopters, the people who kind of take on board the technologies and use them very, very early. People, we could say the people who queue outside the Apple store to get the latest Apple phone 7 are early adopters. And then we have the early majority and the late majority, and then we have the laggards, that kind of group of people who perhaps don't engage with the technologies. This can be applied to pretty much anything. It could be applied to a smart car, it could be applied to sunglasses, it could be applied to microwaves. Everything has a curve. Not everything is adapted by everybody straight away. Not everyone got a television at the same time, because there are various issues, economic issues, technology issues. Not everyone could get a TV signal. If we think about digital radio, not everybody moved straight over to digital radio, even though it was better, because there's issues around the cost of early digital radios. My wife bought me one for my birthday. It was £100, and then we found we actually couldn't really get any signal. And even now, I've had this radio now for about 10 years, I still struggle to get it to work most days, because we live in an area that's very, very kind of very green and a lot of trees, and away from a kind of an urban centre. So these diffusions aren't necessarily down to your own choice. In terms of online health information seeking, this is a survey that was done by the Pew Internet Research Survey in 2012. And this is just kind of up-to-date information that we kind of got access to around 2012, 2013. And they found that 72% of internet users looked online for health information within the past year. That figure will have certainly grown. To what extent, we don't know, but we're talking purely about internet users, not the general population. 26% of the online health seekers said they'd been asked to pay for access for something they wanted to see online, and 2% of those did so. And 35% of US adults say that at one time or another they've gone online specifically to try and figure out what medical condition they or someone else may have. That figure will be greater, and it will probably be fairly representative of the UK. Or these figures do not kind of exist to the extent they do in the US. 1 in 5 internet users have consulted online reviews and rankings of their healthcare providers and treatments. Again, that will have grown because platforms are now appearing where people can do their very much a kind of a trip advisor of their own healthcare treatments. 18% of internet users, 13% of adults have gone online to find others who might have health conditions similar to theirs. So such as patients like me, looking on there to try and find people that have got these chronic or rare conditions that may be more significantly likely to do this. And as we know, and some of you may have come across this, a lot of people go and search, and as we said, there's issues around information literacy. A lot of people go and search incorrect websites now. And in the past, in the world of Web 1.10, you'd go to a website and it would be the NHS, or it would be the NIHR, so the NIH, and you would know that the chances are that quality of information would be accurate and authoritative. Whereas now, we're in a world of post-Web 1.10, if I can say it properly, that people can go on and contribute their own information. Someone can go on now onto a forum, on this one here, and ask about chest pain. And this person here has said that they've had these regular chest pains on the left-hand side, sometimes on the right-hand side, and they sometimes have problems breathing. And they've said that they've consulted the doctor, but the doctor couldn't diagnose it or give them any medicine and advise a chest x-ray. So this person's obviously very, very worried. Now, they've gone to the doctors, which is good, but in a lot of cases you'll find this kind of post where someone's posted and they haven't gone to the doctors and they are genuinely concerned about their healthcare. There may be reasons that they don't want to go to the doctors. In the US, we have to consider the issues around health insurance. They may feel that there's going to be a charge, they can't afford it. We're very lucky in the UK that we don't have that situation. It might be that they've got a fear of doctors. It may be that they've just got a fear of what the problem might be. They may generally not be that concerned about it, but they're just kind of expressing some concern to be on the forum. And what you'll find is a lot of people will reply invariably saying they've got the same problem and they found this. The chances are it may not be that they've got the same problem. And this is the problem with the web. We don't exactly know who we're talking to. We don't know how truthful they're being. And we don't know how accurate they are, what they're saying. So information literacy is a problem. And here's a good example. This is a story from the Telegraph. It was publicised a couple of years ago, and it was a problem with Google Maps. Google Maps incorrectly showed the boundaries of Costa Rica and Nicaragua. So Nicaragua basically invaded Costa Rica. Nicaragua had got an army, Costa Rica had got a militarized police, and they went in and planted a flag, and the Costa Ricans came out and there was a standoff, and basically the Nicaraguans were using Google Maps to show the boundary line of their country, and they whoever it was, this particular force, believed that it was their actual land. So, you know, that is an information literacy problem there. No one cross-checked that information that they were getting on the web. So there are serious health issues around health information. In the US, again, this was a Pew Internet organization. They found that 70% of US adults got information, care or support from a doctor or healthcare professional. Then they found that 60% of adults got information or support from friends or family, and then 24% got their information or support from others who have the same health condition. So we think about this in terms of the web and the social web, and we think about people using the web, using friends, using family, but also using others that have got a same health condition. How do we know that that person has got the same, unless we've got the name for it, unless you've been diagnosed with that particularly rare condition and that other person online has got the same diagnosis and you both know you're being truthful? How do we know you're sharing accurate information that will you know, benefit your health provision? Stories are appearing. You know, this is a story that talked about how the internet is causing more problems for health literacy. You know, it's making it very, very difficult for people to make correct decisions. You get patients now coming in, printing things off the web, reading things off the web, and coming in and saying, "I've read this. I think I've got this condition. I've been feeling like this. I feel like you should give me this treatment. I feel like you should give me these drugs." When in fact, if you go into a GP surgery, the GP will refer to the NICE guidance. He'll refer to the actual guidelines that he's been given, or she has been given, and they will work down that route. They will not go off some spurious thing that someone's brought in off the web. But increasingly, it does happen. I teach master classes to final year med students, many of who go off to be GPs, and they've told me that patients come in. They tell me that they bring in these kind of like little things they printed off the web, and showing some concern for their health condition. This is something that I wrote. So I wrote something about this. My master's dissertation many years ago was about poor quality health information. So I decided to write this very quick piece for the conversation. It looks very much like a Daily Mail kind of piece, but I put it on the conversation, which is a much better platform, and just gave some pointers on how you avoid bogus health information on the web. Things you look for. You look for the authority, you look for the references, you look for the date it was published, you look to see if there's any kind of competing issues, is there any kind of conflict of interest in what's being published. And then we see the stories that are being published in the national media, particularly the Express, the Daily Mail. Daily Mail particularly is a major culprit for this, where they take a piece of research, they take a health story, and then they write the story. They don't invariably kind of cite the reference, and they cherry pick the information. So we see a story where it will say HRT taken over 15 years increases the chances of getting ovarian cancer by a third. And they don't explain that actually what this does not mean. It does not mean that if you are 3 women, that one of you will definitely get ovarian cancer as opposed to none in 3 previously. And this is something that, again, people are not aware of. They're not aware of the literacy. They see a story. They don't report perhaps how many people were involved in a trial, and that if we had a cohort of 10,000 people and one person fell ill because of this intervention, and then if we change the intervention and it was two out of 10,000 fell ill, they would call it a 50% chance increase, but they don't exactly tell you that it's still an exceptionally low risk. So things like NHS Behind the Headlines takes these stories and actually kind of writes about what the actual evidence is and what the story is and how it's been reported and where it's been misreported. Again, most patients will not be aware of Behind the Headlines. many clinicians and healthcare providers will not be aware of this website. So out there, the NHS and other organisations are trying to improve the quality of health information because, like I say, in a social web, anyone can make a health website, anyone can write anything, anyone can pretend to be a doctor, anyone can pretend to be a patient. So there's a lot of health information out there, and this is the information standard by the NHS. They set out they have a collection of certified organisations, over 200 organisations that you can go in, and they have deemed that, such as AIDS UK, Allergy UK, Alzheimer's Society, these are credible, authoritative resources that you can go to for health information. One organisation that's been around for 20 years now, it's just celebrating its 20th birthday, is Health on the Net Foundation, based in Switzerland. They again have this Health on the Net code that they give to organisations who pass a particular criteria. You can go in and go through this set of criteria, through this checklist, and if you're deemed to do everything that is fitting for this, you then get this accreditation. Again, one problem with this and with the previous example is, do people know about this? So if they go to a website and they see Health on the Net code, does it mean anything? Do they know that the difference between that and another website? What stops an illegal website taking these badges and putting them on theirs? How are you going to get them taken down? How can you actually prevent that? If you don't know who's on there, who's running it, how do you stop them from putting these things up and putting this accreditation up? How do you know that they're going to maintain a continual high quality health information? With Health on the Net, there's a yearly fee that I believe, based on whether you're a charitable organisation or non-charitable, and you pay to maintain your accreditation. They have a toolbar, Health on the Net code, which allows people to actually search for good, accurate health information. Then we've got communities. The web is a great place for communities. There's lots and lots out there in terms of healthcare. Even on things like Facebook groups, there are places where people support each other. The NHS have their own. They have their Health Unlocked communities where people can do things around weight loss, smoking support, pregnancy and parenting, irritable bowel syndrome, things that are common problems or common sort of issues that the NHS have to deal with. And again, trying to get people to support each other, to help each other, because a lot of that work, a lot of it can be solved. Things like quitting smoking is a lot easier if there's peer support. You can go and go for your weekly sessions on how to stop smoking, but the minute you walk out, if you suddenly have the yearning to smoke, you may need some kind of peer support to help you with that. So this is the point of these kind of sites. Here's the quit smoking one. Again, it's this idea of this community to help you talk about just let other people know that you're going through the same kind of problems. And then social media has been used to kind of drive initiatives, to drive campaigns. Here is how social media drove a campaign that was the NHS Change Day. Again, it was a day where the NHS was doing a lot of kind of visible things on the web, a lot of things to kind of provide some kind of change and innovation across the NHS, and social media became a natural platform and conduit for this to happen. So these kind of tools, are invaluable for such now as the NHS, because the NHS have been exceptionally slow to engage with Web 2.0. Exceptionally slow to engage with the social web. Very much an overactive firewall, and this is not representative of the whole NHS, certainly it varies trusts, where staff cannot get to useful, accessible and cheap tools and solutions in which to kind of carry out their work or discover information or to kind of carry on a conversation around their areas of expertise. NHS, now actively using things like Twitter and Facebook, and going out and giving active, continual kind of advice, guidance, another way to kind of reach out to people, but provide good quality tips, hints, and information from their website, from their huge pool of resources. The NHS, has an exceptionally huge database of evidence, support, guidelines, and again, this is a great way to kind of reach out to the hundreds of thousands of followers that are on social media. Another option, and this goes back to probably the more kind of traditional discussion forum way of things, set up in Sheffield by Dr. James Munro. This is patient opinion, and this is a way for patients to feed back to their healthcare providers, you know, in their own, very much the kind of their own TripAdvisor kind of setting. And again, with these things, they're not always going to be correct. You're going to get people who perhaps may have various issues, various problems, and may feel that they didn't get the treatment they wanted, and through no fault of the actual NHS or the healthcare provider, and leave some kind of bad feedback. You may get people that are just kind of tipping either way. They're either getting the exceptional feedback or the really bad feedback. Patients who perhaps are just relatively indifferent experience, you know, may feel less inclined to kind of lead this kind of feedback. But the good thing about this is the NHS and the various healthcare providers get to hear what people think about their care, and if there is a problem, it can help hopefully identify where areas where that particular trust or that doctor's surgery can improve. If it's giving back lots of good feedback, then this is great for staff morale. People know they're doing things right, and patients can feel a little bit more confident by going to somewhere that is actually kind of seen to be doing a good job. We've got other things out there. We've got you know, lots of health platforms out there, embarrassing bodies, which I've never seen, but I'm fully aware of, having their own Twitter feed. Now, the issue here is this shouldn't be the first point of call for anybody who has an issue around their body. If you've got some kind of thing that concerns you about your body, you don't go to embarrassing bodies to get advice. You don't go on the television to get advice. If you've got an issue and it's causing you some kind of concern and upset, you go to your doctors. So these things are not there to replace, but they are certainly kind of supplanting. And again, it's another route in. If it gets people, you know, the argument would be if it gets people to kind of go and discuss and open up about a condition or problem that they've been previously shy about, then perhaps there is the benefits in this. But it just shows how these platforms appear. You know, in America, they have the doctors, and as we can see here on this screenshot, these are all absolutely stunning looking models of doctors and nurses and physicians, and they all look like the kind of people who know what they're doing. I don't know if these are genuine doctors. I'd imagine that they are, but it's one of these that anyone can do this. Anyone can go onto Twitter and create a platform and pretend to be, I could pretend to be Andy Tattersall, MD, practicing physician, and I could be in New York State, and I could go out there and start offering health advice to people, and there would be some people who would take it up and would listen to me if I built such a social platform. So these are things that we do have to be wary about. You know, we do have to be concerned that not everything is as it seems. Regards to social media, lots and lots of this is a growing area of contention, a growing area of problems and opportunities. Here is something from the American College of Physicians, Federation of State of Medical Boards, and they clearly say that doctors should not contact or friend patients through personal social media such as Facebook. Text messaging should not be used for passing along medical information except where the patient is consent. Even the doctors should use extreme caution. Doctors should establish an online professional profile so that it appears first on an online search instead of a review of a doctor from a physician ranking site. This can provide more control so the information provided to the patients is accurate, and medical trainees need to be careful about what they post online or they could damage their future careers. There's lots and lots of content coming out like this. This is particularly cautious, particularly wary. Invariably, a lot of these kind of things come out because some doctor or some practitioner has actually gone and done something potentially disastrous using social media. So the guidelines invariably come out. We have some kind of case. We create some law based on that. So it can be sometimes kind of using a hammer to crack a nut. But in the case of this, there are so many potential problems with social media and patients. We think about patients with mental health conditions, patients that are drug or kind of substance addicted. You know, the issues of using social media to do things like make friends with these kind of people, or the patients try and make friends either way. There's a lot of problems out there. So doctors do need to be wary. We also have to think, you know, doctors do have particularly unique position in society. They're relatively have remained at the top of kind of public esteem. They're exceptionally important to us. They look after our healthcare. They're not like others that move up and down the kind of the esteem rankings in society. They stay pretty much at the top, and a lot of patients can form very close relationships with their practitioners, and a lot of them go on to kind of obviously have in their own mind relationships with their doctors that they shouldn't. They kind of see them as something perhaps beyond a professional clinician trying to help them, especially when a lot of these doctors are invariably very friendly and very, very helpful. Social media kind of exacerbates that. Social media is a way that people kind of perceive things in a very different way. If we think about online dating, if we think about social media, people perceive more positive sort of attributes through the web. So it distorts what is reality. The General Medical Council offer advice on social media, and they start here on number 9 that the doctor's use of social media can benefit a patient by engaging people in public and health policy discussions, establishing national, international, professional networks, facilitating patients' access to information about health and services. But then it talks about maintaining the boundaries. It creates risks, particularly where social and professional boundaries become unclear, as I've just said. So you may need to follow the guidance on maintaining a professional boundary between you and your patient. If a patient contacts you about your care or professional matters through a private profile, you should indicate you cannot mix social and professional relationships, and where appropriate, direct them to your professional profile. Now, this has already happened. It's happened a lot in the police sector, in crime sector of the UK, where a lot of cases have been thrown out of court because police officers have made friends with victims, with criminals, with witnesses, and there's a lot of inappropriate behaviour and connectivity across the web. Here's guidance from the BMA. Everyone has guidance. The Royal College of Nursing, General Medical Council, they provide ethical guidance. It's invariably relatively light touch and quite straightforward. They're not creating 20, 30 page documents, thankfully. These are 2, 3, 4 page documents with all the key bullet points. They're treating doctors and medical professionals and students as adults, and basically saying, here's the risks, but there are benefits, but you need to be aware of all those risks. And here is a story that came in The Guardian a while ago. Infatuated patients to use Facebook to stalk doctors. So we know this has been happening. This is 2012. And we know it will be continuing to happen. And so it is an area that doctors and clinicians need to be certainly made aware of. Now I'm going to talk about the wisdom of the crowd. The thing that the social web has allowed us to do is connect as a crowd. It's created a hive mentality. We can all connect. We can all kind of work and solve problems. We can discuss things en masse. And this can be anything from kind of some kind of civil movement to a kind of a health epidemic problem. Probably one of the early examples of using kind of public data to gain some kind of insight was Google Flu Trends. Around 2009, 2010, Google Flu Trends became more accurate at finding out potential flu epidemics in the US, in US states, than the Centre for Disease Control and Prevention. And they did this by looking at the search logs, geographically based, that were coming in for things like flu. And they could kind of go, we're getting X amount of searches for flu in Nebraska, so what have we got from the CDC? We find actually there is actually a bit of an outbreak of flu in Nebraska. We were detecting this already on Google Flu Trend. And this worked well for a while, but then it became pretty much it became relatively ineffective. It still exists, but it became relatively ineffective at detecting this. And one of the problems of this kind of the big data that this was building, and the big data that these forecasts were building, was that knock-on was that it was getting a lot of media attention. As you would imagine, it's a great story. Google is able to detect potential flu epidemics. And this caused news stories, and this caused people then to search for flu who didn't have flu, but were concerned that there was flu in their area, which started to create inaccurate search results on the web. Things like Twitter have been, that used or looked at for things like trying to predict things like women's postnatal depression. Postnatal depression is a very, very hard condition, not to necessarily diagnose, but for people to present themselves at a doctor's surgery with what may be postnatal depression. A lot of women who've just had a child, obviously sleep deprived, hormonal change, and a potentially a huge shift in their kind of lifestyle, can succumb to postnatal depression. And trying to find these women that have got this, because obviously they're at risk to their own health and their child's health, their baby's health, could possibly have been found by looking at someone's Twitter feed. And this is done again in a Web 3.0 world, where we look at the semantic web. We look at what words mean. So we look at people. We look at the text to see if there's text in there that indicates they've had a new baby. We look to see if there's text that indicates things like tired, depressed, sad, angry. Kind of words that are negative. That could possibly build up a picture that someone is suffering with that. There's obviously ethical issues based in this. A lot of these people will not know that their data is being trawled for this kind of information. It's a breach into someone's privacy. People regard social media as private, even though it kind of isn't. Well, in fact, it isn't. So that we look at this. If you want real privacy on the web, you have to be using something like a Tor browser, your own virtual network, and pretty much kind of stay offline. And if you're going to use social media, something that's off on the dark web, or even go as far as use something like Ello if you wanted to. But even that's not going to kind of be totally private. So there are ethical issues around this, even though there is a lot of good intention. The semantic web allows us to kind of look at the meaning of words. It makes us, if we put in cancer, are we talking about a condition, or are we talking about a star sign? If we're talking about a virus, is this a human or a computer virus? So these are things that the semantic web allows us now to find out. So it allows us to potentially trawl this data. But with Google Flu Trends and with big data, we can see that there are flaws in it. It doesn't always, having more data doesn't always give us a better answer. With crowdsourcing, we have things out there, things like WotC, which, in Africa and some of the poorer nations of the world, there are conditions that can have severe health implications for people. Things that we've eradicated in the West, and conditions that we could cure for just a few dollars, a few pounds. So WotC is this idea of crowdfunding, low cost, high impact medical care for people in need. Potential issues with this is it becomes a bit of an X factor, kind of a contest based on who do you like the look of most to give the money to. Should it be the nice looking young child, or should it be the old person? Where is the value? How do you make those decisions? So this kind of, again, opens up ethical decisions, but it is still potentially a good thing. And again here, crowdfunding, this idea of creating this linked MD, your healthcare footprint, which is this kind of project to get people, again, to kind of put in money to create some kind of healthcare project. Moving on to mobile and healthcare. Here's some data from the Pew again, where they found that 31% of cell owners and 52% of smartphone owners use their phone to look up health and medical information. Now, since they've done this research, that will have moved on. Those figures will have moved on. We're going to be looking at a lot more. I'd imagine we're looking at, 60, 70% of people have used smartphones to look up health or medical information. They noted in their research that this finding in the US was of particular interest to those interested in trends related to young people, Latinos, African Americans, since these groups are significantly more likely than other groups to have mobile internet access. And they found that 19% of smartphone owners have downloaded an app specifically to track and manage health. That figure is obviously going to be much higher from when that research was conducted. There's tools out there. This one that's been around for a long time, Mappiness, still exists, and it allows people to map their happiness, their happiness, their health happiness. So there's lots and lots of tools out there. It was a project done by the London School of Economics. So just look at some of the tools that are out there that's been used in healthcare, and I'm only really tipping the iceberg here. It's the tip of the iceberg kind of stuff, but there's how certain things have been used in the past to access the health and the web. So we've got the NHS web tools out there. They've got their own set of tools, tools that they bring in that they deem as useful, that can be kind of used out there, that they would regard as being useful and relatively affordable, that people can kind of access, provided their firewall will allow them. NHS Choices have this collection of tools here. We can look, they're all split into different categories: alcohol, child health, fitness, health and safety. Again, these have to go through some degree of development and peer review, but again, how many people know that this exists? This comes back to the issue of how many people know this exists. If someone wants health information or wants the NHS, they invariably just go to the NHS, they go to 111, or the number is now, they go in, they go out. They're not necessarily going to search for these things. Tools out there that are being used by such as Shrewsbury and Telford Health Libraries, using things like NetVibes to curate lots and lots of health information out there and create their own resource around clinical governance, infection control, nursing, palliative care, primary care, etc. And this is a resource that they created for their own staff, totally free, using a tool called NetVibes. Again, other ways that people and practitioners can improve their knowledge of healthcare and within health is to go on to things like the MOOCs, the Massive Online Open Courses, of which HAR runs their own, recently run on health inequalities and health technology assessment by your module leader Claire Beecroft. And this is one here, caring for people with psychosis and schizophrenia. It's a 4-week course, 3 hours a week, and it's totally free, and you can get a certificate at the end of it. So very useful to people out there. This is a useful free resource that people can access now and interact. So you can go on, watch it at your leisure, watch it on your smartphone, watch it on your tablet. You can go on, comment, have discussions with people. The social web has allowed us to do that. So there will be people attending this course who are carers for people with these conditions and can have a conversation with other carers, whether that be family members or professional carers who know people with these conditions. Then there's the ways that we can present data and information. This has all changed. Information is Beautiful is a fantastic book by David McCandless, as well as Knowledge is Beautiful, and is a wonderful website. And it allows us to take complex, quite often complexly presented information via kind of a lot of text, a lot of words and tables, and present it very, very quick and simple. We can see here diabetes in the US. We can see the breakdown of people. We can see how much this costs, and we can see how much it costs for a patient in hospital for a day due to diabetes. So again, we can kind of get the information quite simply broken down. And then there's gamification. The web again allows people to kind of interact, see these things, find out about these things, and create these kind of resources. There's a link down there. If you do a search for BBC Click can online games help battle cancer, that title at the top, you'll find some videos where they've created some games for children who are going through cancer treatment, going through chemotherapy, radiotherapy, and games that have been invented that explain their cancer treatment, which obviously is a very, very scary thing for anyone to go through. And imagine going through as a child, understanding why you're so sick. These games help them understand what is going on with their body and how they are battling to beat it. Social media, again, a useful way. Here we look at the public list of Guardian Healthcare. They've got this public list of Twitter followers that they deem as very, very high quality communicators around health information. So they've created this list. So we get to curate our own knowledge list. And this is what Web 2.0 has done for us. This is what it can do for the NHS. This is what it can do for health practitioners. It allows you to curate your own knowledge base based on, kind of your own expertise. So if you are an expert in a particular area and you know all the other experts in that particular area, and you know that some of them are on the social web, you can interact with them, you can curate them into some kind of list like this if they're on Twitter, and then you can kind of tap into their knowledge, have conversations with them. Tools like Mendeley, which you may use to do your reference management. Again, lots and lots of research publications put in there. You can go in, you can start to discover them, and you can curate them. You can find out what other people are sharing, and you can start to tap into their knowledge. Things like Scoop It, again, this is a curation tool. It's an excellent curation tool, and this allows you to kind of, if you've got a particular interest, if there's an interest that you've got as part of your study, if you're interested in palliative care, then you can create your own kind of board of web articles that you find around that particular topic. RSS feeds, really simple syndication, been around for a long time, and were very, very popular until probably around 5 or 6 years ago. They still exist. This allows you to use things like RSS aggregators to then go to websites like the BMJ and get that information all streamed down into your own kind of news aggregator. It creates your own kind of magazine. These have been replaced to some extent by personalized magazines, things like Zeit and stuff like that, but still a useful way to kind of access and find good information and having it fed automatically rather than keep having to search it down. Lots and lots of presentations out there, and they get put onto things like SlideShare, which is owned by LinkedIn. And again, another way to find out good quality health information. If you know that you've got experts on there that are posting their presentations on, you can get access to these. In the same way, you could go to YouTube and get that. It requires peer review for a lot of people. Then they're always going to have that particular problem of not knowing how authoritative something is, but we can learn, and as students on this course, you will learn and know how to critique health information. You'll know what is good quality and what isn't. So it's just trying to show you the very many different ways that information can be put out there, and I'm only kind of tapping into a few of them really. But SlideShare is a huge database of presentations and posters. Mobile devices, increasingly, obviously, mobile devices are growing and eating into our kind of our life. Various stories are coming out about the amount of times adults get up in the middle of the night to check their phone, the amount of times that children get up to check their phone. Some children getting up as many times as 10 times a night, and adults the same, to check their smart devices and check their phones. We become, to some extent, heavily addicted to them, and there's this kind of fear that comes with it called nomophobia, the fear of not having your mobile phone. It does exist, nomophobia, and people do have these kind of problems, and we do see companies making fake mobile phones out of rubber or plastic that you can keep in your pocket in case you haven't got your phone, so it feels like you've got your phone with you to such an extent, as sad as it may be for some people that have to kind of go down that route. But as these devices are kind of becoming more widespread, it allows such as this to happen. The BBC launched their own WhatsApp Ebola service. Lots of people use WhatsApp. Ebola was obviously very, very much in the news and quite prevalent 2 years ago, and this allowed this app to be used aimed at people in West Africa to kind of get information on Ebola, because obviously a very virulent disease, it spreads very easily and is pretty disastrous, for these populations that were getting it. So using a tool on a mobile device gives you kind of a bit more information as to how to kind of go on. This here is the European Directory of Health Apps. This is when it first came out in 2012. There is a better and newer one now if you do a search for My Health Apps, and this is a kind of a website where they try and give public patients and carers a quick, easy way to find trusted apps. So you go in there and you can search via various conditions, mental health, via your heart, kind of phobias, lots and lots of different kind of conditions, and find apps that they've deemed by this kind of peer review process as good quality apps. Now, there are going to be apps that are going to slip through. There's going to be apps that are not that great. So again, it's always very, very hard to kind of review these things in terms of their quality. The NHS have their own app suite. They had an app suite until around 8 months ago, which was around 73 apps, again, to help people with stress and anxiety, with mental health, with diabetes. And they found, a study found that around a third of these could be used to get ID theft or fraud. And since then, this NHS app suite has gone offline, and they're currently working on it, as it says on their website. And it kind of followed after this story, so I'd imagine that the two very much were tied together. Just to finally kind of have a look at some of the kind of the boundaries between the NHS and the web, which are chipping away and not as they were, but a lot of the issues around why the NHS was so slow to kind of take advantage of the web and Web 2.0 and the social web and the mobile web, etc., was that they didn't have a culture of IT curiosity and appreciation of the new web in IT. Things like IT Connecting for Health disempowered managers and IT staff in the NHS. It was no longer part of their job, according to someone that I spoke to a couple of years ago who was involved with technology provision within the NHS. They said it was a consequence of the new system was that they just didn't have to think about technology and its design. So they became disempowered. And there's also, as you can imagine with the NHS, there is a culture of risk averseness. That it's one of these that do they want to replace people with systems? New systems invariably do cause people to worry about whether they're going to keep their job. Lots of these technologies come in, but they're actually they're invariably not going to lose people their jobs. They're just about streamlining and getting better value for money. And again, the social web and engaging more with the web, we as I said, clinicians are experts. Not only do they see themselves as experts, but everyone else sees them as experts. So they're not comfortable with patient knowledge. And obviously patients now have knowledge. They have access to everything. They have access to give opinion on anything. Certainly in the UK, I think that people are happy to accept mediocrity. So this kind of continues. We're happy to go out and have a half-decent meal. We're happy to accept half-decent things. And that with technology in the NHS, they were paying for products which perhaps were no longer serving their needs. They were paying a lot of money for getting these products off the shelf and kind of accepting that these were pretty much as good as you could get, when in fact better technologies were coming around and appearing at a fraction of the cost. Again, speaking to this colleague who'd worked who was working supporting the NHS as a consultant, said that they, a client for small businesses, they don't pay bills on time, and that helps keep small businesses afloat. Now, lots of these technologies, lots of these startups are small businesses. They're 5, 6 people, maybe 20, 30 people. They're small businesses, whereas the NHS is a huge organisation who works with very large vendors. So the idea of dealing with new, smaller vendors is not so straightforward. And that's not just exclusive to the NHS. This is large organisations as a whole. Large organisations can get away with a lot more than small organisations. There's also, within NHS there was this kind of fear of failure. All these stories that came out a few years ago in 2009 about the expensive IT system being scaled back. New NHS computer system on the brink of failure, warned MPs. £20 billion NHS system doomed to fail. A lot of pressure. We get 12 billion, we get 20 billion. It's kind of a big jump there in that kind of price. But it's this kind of issue that we have to get value for money. In the times of austerity, in the times of kind of cutbacks and increasing pressure on the NHS, they have to get the value for money in terms of how they spend it. There's also this kind of idea of culture of restriction. until years ago, a few years ago, the NHS were tied, their systems and staff were tied to using Internet Explorer and earlier versions of Internet Explorer. So even though Internet Explorer 9 or 10 might have been out, the NHS was still using versions of 5 or 6 because it was safe, it was stable, but it didn't work with some websites. You couldn't go to a website with an old browser. It wouldn't allow you to view it. So again, it creates this culture of restriction. It stops people from getting Adobe Flash onto their computer because the IT department have tied it down. And this was a big problem for the NHS and will still remain so in certain parts of the NHS. It's about getting access. Here are various blogs out there. There was a renal czar blog, which was on Blogger. We had a dementia adventure site. We have these portals, excuse me. And again, the problem being that lots of these are based on third-party platforms, on Google Blogger, on WordPress, on NetVibes. Lots of NHS firewalls will just block them automatically. So this does create various problems. Then there's these kind of the issues of people engaging with the web badly. Lots of these are old stories around how NHS staff have got into trouble for using things on Facebook and on Bebo. But then there are the issues at the bottom, like YouTube banned an NHS video of a drunk girl urinating in the street, it was a Derbyshire NHS video to explain the problems of binge drinking. It was a legit video explaining, and it just kind of used this kind of image to also back up that binge drinking isn't good for you, but also this is how it makes you look. But it was banned at the time when it came out. So it goes both ways. We've got staff who don't know how to use things, or certainly use them in a very incorrect way, and then we've got platforms that can perhaps be a little bit too sensitive. Finish off with this kind of quote from Albert Einstein, which is great. Apparently it wasn't Albert Einstein. Apparently it was a woman, but there's no way of finding out who this woman is. I spent ages trying to find out this, and all this quote is attributed to is Albert Einstein. And it is, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So here's some references for you. The slides are available, so you'll be able to kind of have a look at those anyway if you so wish. There's my contact details, and hopefully you found that useful and engaging. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. Thank you very much. Goodbye.